Okay, so today we're going to have a little update on the SNIA Storage Network Industry Association Storage Management Initiative, and I think we're going to talk mainly about the Swordfish management standard, storage management standard. So perhaps for those that aren't as familiar with it as others, can you just give us a very brief sort of resume of what that standard is, what it does?
Sure. The SNIA Swordfish spec is actually an extension of DMTF's Redfish specification. So our spec itself really just focuses on adding all of the storage-specific extensions. So we let DMTF worry about protocols and all of the underlying bits and bobs, and that lets us just focus on all of the actual storage specific pieces. So we focus on, all of the configurations for anything basically above a drive that's directly attached to, a single drive, single or one or two drives directly attached to a server. Anything above that is covered by Swordfish. So we work with everyone from direct attached configurations that are building HBAs and RAID cards and have anything more than a very simple configuration. Anytime those start to get very big, you want to go to Swordfish. And then we're also doing a lot of work with obviously external storage, things like that, file systems that we've done historically. And a lot of our recent work in the last couple of years has also been focusing on making sure we have excellent support and are basically the management interface for NVMe Express and NVMe over fabrics. So while they have direct interfaces when you want to bring them up and manage them at scale in an enterprise data center attached in your systems, that's where you want to bring in Swordfish. And we partner with the Redfish quite extensively, so you get comprehensive management across server storage and fabrics.
Okay, and you mentioned NVMe Express there, and
Yep.
And also the fact that you sort of work with other. So can you just give us an outline what you do with them, and presumably there's some other industry partner organizations that you do stuff with? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start with our partnership with both DMTF and NVMe Express. As I mentioned, we extend Redfish, and so when we've started working with NVMe Express, it's actually a three-way agreement. So we basically lead the work bringing NVMe support into server management and storage management, because there are some cases where NVMe are going to be very simple. But what we've done over the last couple of years is basically taken and put the two specs side by side, or actually kind of on top of each other, because Redfish and Swordfish you bring in at the top layer with your enterprise and your data system and your system management, and then you have NVMe, the base specs coming up from the devices over your PCI bus or at this level, and we basically built the bridge between those two things. So we've done everything from mapping all the schema properties between one and the other, as well as also writing documentation. So one of our pieces of collateral is we call the mapping guide. So that allows somebody who's not necessarily super familiar with one or the other to come in and be able to say, okay, this property, what does that correspond to over here? And so we've got lots of material that talks about how to manage NVMe devices. They are storage devices, but there's a few differences from the way we've done traditional storage management, and we've mapped all of those things together. So you have seamless management and standards-based all the way up from your NVMe devices using admin commands or MI out of band, and then putting Redfish and Swordfish on top of that. And so I will frequently say Redfish and Swordfish, because to us it's all one thing. We cover the storage portions of the schema, and Redfish covers a lot of the base schema. So we extend wherever we need to. We try not to reinvent any wheels anywhere, but we focus on all those storage specific use cases like the NVMe environment, which is why NVMe Express came to SNIA as a way to lead that whole mapping effort.
Okay, and I'm guessing a logical extension, which I think is fairly new to you, is the Conformance Test Program, which in simple terms presumably is where you're checking that everything works together and does, if I don't know, a particular manufacturer says it does this, it does actually conform to your standard, etc. Can you just give us some? Oh, that's probably wildly inaccurate, but in simple. But give us the actual, how does it work?
It's a very good simplification. So SNIA has actually had conformance test programs for management software for many years. We've had the SNIA Conformance Test Program. And so we've basically taken that same concept and applied it to Swordfish. So what we've done in order to be able to enable that is we've developed what we call a set of profiles. And a profile is basically a written agreement effectively between the clients and servers that say, this is the functionality that's going to be, that we're going to implement as at a minimum for the standard. And that's what we test through the Conformance Test Program. And so we have a set of open source based tools. Redfish actually uses a lot of these same tools, a lot of the same infrastructure, but they don't have a formalized program around it like SNIA does. We found this to be much more important on the storage side historically. And so what we've got basically are a set of about, you can kind of think of them as little recipes that you can build and add on top of. But we've got about 20 different profiles that that implementations can pick from and say, I want to do this set of features. I want to do this set of features. And then they can test those through the Swordfish Conformance Test Program. And then advertise, both compliance, vendor neutral compliance validation. Hey, it wasn't just us, SNIA says we did this too, as well as then the clients can see specifically what's in there. We also have a runtime feature that allows someone to tell at runtime what specifically of those features they're supporting. So they can tell both at runtime, or they can go check the website and verify that those tests actually did pass. So we're very proud of that. We've developed, like I said, this whole thing on an open source based reference implementation. We have a couple of companies working with the program now. And what they're doing is they're actually not waiting until the end of, until their products are complete and trying to start testing. They're actually using the program and the test framework while they're doing development. So as they're developing, they're saying, is this what we're proposing to do going to pass? And we can run through and check and give them feedback. And so as they iterate through their whole development cycle to get their products out, they're able to get closer and closer to and help them accelerate their development at the same time, ensuring that they're building the right thing. So that's one of the features that participating with our interoperability lab and our conformance test program early can offer.
And I think you said there are about 20 profiles. Is that sort of for the time being everything you envisage, or is that the first tranche and there's going to be some more you've got to bring, or they just happen as new technologies and vendors do different things? And how do you see that?
Yes, good question. So we've actually, this is kind of our second wave. So I do envision that there will be more, and customers can also kind of create their own based on kind of a pick and choose. So the way these are structured is we have a set of base functionality profiles, and these include everything from base discovery, am I advertising myself correctly, to block provisioning. What are the base, what are the requirements that I have to do in order to say I can advertise that I support provisioning. And then we have, ones that get a little bit more complicated, replication, all of these kinds of base features that you'd expect from storage devices. And then we have a whole set we've developed for NVMe as well. There's an NVMe drive. There's an NVMe Ethernet attached drive. And so again, these are cumulative. Those Ethernet attached drive it just references the drive one as the base one and adds a few more requirements. So as implementers are going through, they can basically say, well, I know I built an Ethernet attached drive, but I also support provisioning. So I'm just going to also say that I support this other little profile and bring that in. So we don't have to basically come up with, these huge, long, completely independent ones. They're all these nice little chunks. What we've been doing in this last release, version 1.2.4, that we're actually just in the middle of releasing right now, we've added about 8 new profiles in this bundle. They include getting into a little bit more detailed functionality for implementations, things like access rights management, connectivity management, especially as we get into NVMe over fabrics. It's actually the same fabric requirements as for external storage devices connected to fabrics. So we've made sure that those are standardized, but we've also specified here's the base requirements and the functionality for how you do that. We've also then gone back in and added some, what we call some aggregation style profiles. So we have a couple things that are they don't really have a lot of functionality in and of themselves, but they're basically, I want those 4 profiles and that's your requirements. And these are good for things like JBOFs and EBOFs, where all of the components are something else, but we can basically say, if you're going to build an NVMe EBOF, your actual requirements are include these 4 profiles, and that's all nice and wrapped up into a single descriptor then. So those are the kinds of things we expect to keep building. We'd like to and are doing some work to reach out to the OCP organization on trying to extend. They've got server-based profiles now, and we're looking at what we can do to take some of the work we've done and the basics here to extend that to cover storage attached functionality in the OCP configuration.
Yeah, is part, and I won't say it's a problem because it's probably a nice thing to have, but do you find yourselves sometimes wondering what you should be doing? Where do you draw the boundaries, and where should you get involved and where shouldn't you, or do you think you've got it's fairly, because it seems to me these days storage, as you say, and then you've got the servers, and then you've got the whole data sort of the storage, I get that, but obviously the data that sits on it is becoming important, which is slightly separate, but obviously it's not unrelated. So yeah, if that makes some kind of sense.
It does.
Is it easy to?
The question is kind of like, where do you draw the line between what one organization does and what another one does? Well, we addressed that through the alliance agreements. So let me talk about another set of work we've got going right now. That all wraps up into the same space. We've got some work going on around storage fabric management. And we're working with 5 different organizations right now jointly. So this is work that's going on in the Open Fabrics Alliance. But we've pulled in folks from DMTF on the Redfish side, Swordfish for the storage use cases, OFA because they want to help make sure that this is an open architecture that works across all different fabric types, and then we pulled in both Gen Z and CXL as a couple of different fabric types that are enabled and working within this right now. And so in terms of who does what, in some cases it's the same people just wearing different hats, because I also participate and help develop the Swordfish or the Redfish specification. But when we're doing an effort like this, what we actually do is we go through and say, okay, fabric management for storage, the basics are the same as it's just fabric management. That's Redfish stuff. So let's go make sure all of that's complete, and then we can start layering on the functionality we need for storage. So into those little bits and pieces in, it's not something different. These meetings and this work is kind of a great way to highlight that the work is this tiny little intersection between what all the other organizations are bringing in. We're not reinventing anything. We're just saying, okay, here's the little piece that's not done yet. Let's go do that. And then feed that back in to any one of the 4 organizations that needs it.
And in terms of the overall commitment to openness, I mean, I've been involved in the storage industry on and off for a number of years, shall we say, and I know heterogeneous storage was talked about, and sort of issues within the stuff, and I know since then the whole open movement has gained massive momentum. But do you find it now there is just sort of completely, if you like, universal acceptance of open storage and everyone's working towards it, or is there, without naming names, are some vendors less willing to get involved in complete openness than others? I mean, just sort of observations.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of question about how folks are, should best engage, is the way I put that, because there are a lot of things happening. Within the storage space, there's everything from groups that are developing, kind of think of it as, references. This is they want to develop a spec, or it's not really a spec, it's more like a recipe book that says this is the kind of configuration we want to put together, and they're basically need to refer to other people's specifications. And they don't really largely develop their own specifications. They still need standards groups and standards bodies to come in and say, what is the spec underneath this? There's a lot. Security has a ton of these same kinds of things. There's a tremendous amount of sharing and overlap in security and security use cases that cross the boundaries between what the needs are for servers and storage instrumentation, and they're crossing about 8 different organizations right now. It's very chaotic, but it's also, so when you look at something like that and ask a company, you say, where do I go plug in? It can be a little overwhelming to figure out where the pieces are. But that's why some of these alliances are really important, because it's not just SNIA driving these, it's all the rest of these organizations that are doing that. So I've been talking a lot about the manageability space, but if I just talk about store or security, which is also something that's very important on the manageability side, we have work going on in like OCP with this open organization. They really like to say, here's what to do, and then the details you fill in from these different specs. And that's what's been going on there. So they're looking at, hey, how do we do attestation? So DMTF has a really low level spec for how to do attestation, management based functionality at a low level. And so then over at SNIA, we can look at that and say, well, yes, we care about that. We don't need to define that ourselves. DMTF has that. We can look at how we build that functionality, and we refer to those specs that are being developed in DMTF and in PCI SIG and in TCG. And so one of our other twigs, the object drive twig, that's working on specifications for these more intelligent standalone drives, can just pull those in, and we don't have to go and kind of again reinvent any wheels there. And it all gets pulled in again under this manageability umbrella, where it's not just redfish and swordfish, it's redfish and swordfish and SPDM and a handful of other different specs that all get put together to make a comprehensive solution.
Okay, and in terms of I think you fairly recently opened your the Storage Management Initiative. You opened your next generation lab, so I'm guessing that also contributes to the development of solutions, or I'm assuming that, but tell me how it works. I mean, have you got some sort of sponsor vendors that put kit in there, or is it you specified it and then other people are welcome to come in and plug in their hardware, software into what you've got? How does it work?
Oh, thank you. So yes, we've spent a bunch of time over the pandemic we're working on how we optimize some of our programs, and one of those involved taking what we'd had in our tech center in Colorado Springs and basically getting rid of all of the old stuff and focusing entirely on new stuff. So we've just opened the new SNIA Innovation Lab, and it is we have basically almost all new equipment, but donated from vendors, and are starting to build up again from that. In addition to the SM lab, we also support 2 other interoperability labs, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in terms of getting folks to engage with the storage management lab, we are really quite open, and we're trying to work on how we enable some of these new technologies. Historically, it's been a great place for companies to come in, bring early prototypes of management software, sometimes even early prototypes of hardware, but we focus on manageability, sit down, do interoperability, try things out, see what works, and then as the standards matured, bring in clients, bring in others to kind of work and have a place where folks can play with multiple and interact with multiple different types of vendor equipment without worrying too much about about the scope, right? You're all within our lab. You're under our NDA agreements. So anything that happens in there is really just all focused on working on improving everyone's implementations, whether it's client side or vendor side. We also support for folks working with our lab, within our lab, that again, that early access to the conformance testing. So that could feed in to helping the environments, everyone just able to improve their environments because they can run, as their implementations start to move along, they can run that conformance test against it and just see how they're doing. Some of the other pieces, like I mentioned, we're working on trying to expand that. NVMe, we've talked about quite a bit. We're talking about things like Ethernet attached drives, which is a little bit different than we've had in the past. So how do you bring that into the lab? We're working with some vendors to say, okay, if you wanted, we're going to bring drive, just a couple of drives into the lab. What do you want? What do you need from us from an infrastructure to be able to support that? Do you need a server to, how are they physically going to show up? Are they going to show up in an EBOF? When in the cycle? Are you going to give us a standalone drive that we can plug in? So we need, some sort of, space in our rack that we can just lay drives and plug them in, some form of infrastructure like that. Or are you working with EBOF vendors? Are you, how are we going to bring you guys in to start working on that? That's one of the things we're doing right now because with the Ethernet drives able to just directly embed Swordfish, they're like the complete opposite of big iron, right? They're little tiny iron. And so we need to figure out how we enable them working in the interoperability lab. The other pieces that I mentioned, and this, again, I've talked a lot about how we work with everybody else. We really do a lot of work with our alliance partners to help accelerate everyone's development and not overlap as much as possible. Within the SNIA Innovations Lab, we also have space for the Redfish Interoperability Lab. They host a rack of equipment within our lab space. And we have another group within SNIA that we should be announcing their lab space as well that is just ramping up. So we have 3 different labs basically all within the same footprint, all working on interoperability testing and early access for our member companies.
Okay, and maybe just as we sort of finish, I mean, either if there's anything else we haven't covered, but also, I mean, you hinted there obviously that you didn't tell us what, but there's another interoperability lab on the horizon. Is there anything else on the roadmap that you're able to let us know a bit more about? Because I mean, it sounds like you're incredibly busy anyway, so I'm not suggesting that you need to keep yourself even more busy, but I mean, what else are you looking at doing, I guess?
So one of the big things we're adding into Swordfish and the whole storage management ecosystem is right now focusing on getting some of the feedback from implementations and incorporating those in. We have some other things on the horizon that are fairly straightforward that are like just looking at adding support for NVMe 2.0 that came out last year. All of the work we've done with mapping everything to date has been on the 1.4 base. So we'll be moving all of that over. So our big functionality is really just a pivot to trying to drive folks to help use the lab that we've spent so much time getting up and running and ready for. We know we have some more new equipment coming in shortly. We'd like to encourage others to engage there and get some more clients engaged. And then the CTP function, we expect to have multiple events during this year. We do everything from what we call mockathons to testathons to hackathons. So a mockathon, one of the earliest tools we use in developing anything within the Redfish and Swordfish ecosystems are just mockups. And what we're doing with the mockups within the programs are really, the mockathon is, if anybody who wants to just get started, can come and we will help them, either evaluate the existing mock-ups they have, take our, say, here, what does your system look like? What would you like it to look like? And then as things move along, either if they have full-fledged mock-ups they want to run through this, or even a POC, we move them into what we call a testathon. And a testathon's, again, it's a few hour, 1 day kind of thing, but it's we'll take it and we'll help them through walking through running against the CTP testing and say, here's where your gaps are, here's where your issues are. You can go off and start working on those. So we're trying to stage these events in to help folks understand where they are in their development cycle, where we can help them accelerate if they have issues, questions about this that are outside the scope of, hey, we found this additional property we need, which is great. That stuff can all happen as well as coming through the twig and the enhancements to the spec. But the Storage Management Initiative is really there to help with all of the rest of these pieces and enabling, hopefully helping everyone to enable their development and accelerate their development as well.
Okay, I mean, it's lovely. We've covered a fair amount of ground, and Richelle, I'm really grateful for you spending the time. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's great talking with you.